Alright, while we're waiting, what you see here is actually something that I took a few hours on Saturday to make. This is an edited PDF of the Oxford translation of the Phenomenology, where, as you know, some things annoy me, and I've been switching the words. So I actually just did a simple word swap. But on top of that, this is a PDF where I'm kind of going through and taking some notes. If you want a copy of this, once it's done, send me an email. Also, this has added thematic section titles, which I don't know why they don't have these, because there's actually a set of sections that really all follow one theme, and it's really nice to just be able to flip it open and know by eye, oh, here's where like this theme is covered. Also, unbeknownst to me, but I wasn't paying attention that much while I'm reading, for the recordings in the reading group. But there are a lot of typos in the Oxford edition. It's kind of shameful for this publishing giant, of Oxford University to have mistreated this text so badly. It's a shame. That's kind of an insult to Inwood. How is the phenomenology spirit different to the logic? The phenomenology spirit is, one, about consciousness. Two, the way that it moves is slightly different. I actually have an explanation that I just wrote up. If you go and look at the Empyrean Trail, the Phenomenology Spirit section, there is a general comments one called Section on Consciousness. And I do cover like what the difference is in that. And then recently in my latest updated post on negative dialectics, I give the examples as to why people think that the way dialectics work in the phenomenology is different to the way that they work in the science of logic. Oh, the color code. Yellow is just general points that Hegel's making. Orange is like general polemic points. Blue is the philosophical main points. Green is for definitions. If you've been watching the other videos, I always tell people, notice definitions. They are very important. They help you work out a lot of shit. And then purple is because there are very quotable sections here. Lines that I'd like to keep track of because I forget where the heck they are. So yeah. So this is just the preface. I only did this for the preface. If I do this for anything else, I will just basically do this again in the future, both for the science of logic and for the phenomenology spirit, because it's nice. It's nice for me. I don't have to like translate words on the fly and. Do I think Inwood is better than Miller's? I don't think any of the translations are actually better, really. Besides being more consistent, the new translations from Cambridge and Oxford aren't really better. If you watch the other sections, I've shown you people where like the phrasing is better in one or the other. Inwood has some forms of phrasing that I definitely like better. They're more economical. And then he also has these phrasings that are just really obtuse. And then likewise, Miller like often has, you know, better phrasing that's more that's more readable in my opinion. But also Miller's problem is that he does not translate terms consistently. And then once you start looking at the original German and looking at the translations of any of the translations, you realize uh, there are problems no matter what you do. And so if the issue is I want to know exactly what Hegel says, you know, without any ambiguity, without, you know, certain words being collapsed into one word in English, which happens a lot. Like, for example, the word presence like translates like 5 different fucking words from German. And like, you know, some people are really sticklers for that, and they'll make a whole big stink about it. So, for example, when if you don't know, I've decided to start. I decided to change Dasein to a presence instead of existence, which is what Giovanni does existence, and a lot of other people do. Because I don't like determinate being. There's a reason that it's not a bestimmte Sein. But it also happens to be that there's all like 5 other words that are translated as presence. So what am I supposed to do with that? And looking through the science of logic, at least, I was doing some swaps, and I'm like, well, for most of it, it's not hard to swap it. Presence is not that much of a determinate term where we can't have, like, we have a bunch of synonyms for things that are just there, and that's what presence means. It's just there, quite literally the being there. Yeah. So it's interesting to go through a lot of that stuff and figure out and just phrase it that way. And I think one of the things I noticed is that even with the Giovanni, like there's not a consistent term translation because the translators decide for you that they think that one meaning is the one that fits. Like Aufhebung, it's only translated as sublation generally when it's kind of clear that all 3 meanings are meant. But if it seems that it's only a colloquial use where one meaning is meant, then they just choose to use the singular translation. Hello. Nabanis Sujish. So anyways, yeah, I'm using this. If you want a copy, send me an email. My email is on, well, everywhere. We were going to begin in section 48. We still got 10 minutes. Also, something that you would probably be very interested in. Let me show you something. So, you see this. It's a document I'm working on. So this is the written. This is going to be the written form of my commentary. And just like that, I have it broken up into the sections. This is supposed to be a side commentary that you read along paragraph by paragraph with whatever it is that you're reading. I mean, obviously I'm using the Oxford as the basis of mine, but obviously I have my own changes. The title is going to involve upheaval and apocalypse in some way. It's a wordplay. Upheaval, off Hibung. Apocalypse, both it's the end of all things, the end of the world, but also it's revelation, and it's also the end as the purpose. So throughout this preface, if you've followed along so far, there's been a lot of identities between these two things. Truth is revelation, it's unveiling. It's also the purpose, it's the end towards which a thing moves. And then how does that happen? Well, it happens through upheavals. Upheavals are revelations. Revelations are only insofar as they are upheaved. The early stuff, like the first 15, I would say, are pretty basic. Anybody can read those. It's not hard to understand. It's in this section on the initial appearance of science and afterwards that things start getting interesting, and I have a lot more to say than I said when I was recording. Particularly what struck me was section 18 and section 20. I had a huge expansion of things. Oh, Findlay's is awful. I haven't looked at Inwood's, honestly, but I've looked at other people's commentaries. Yes, I will actually publish this, not for free, because this is on a level that doesn't exist. I have looked at Harris. I have looked at this other guy who wrote a commentary on the full preface as well. I forget what his name is. But these people do not explain to you what's going on in the text like I do. They do a lot of cultural commentary, a lot of historical commentary. Hegel's referencing this. He's talking about that. This is who he's kind of like jabbing at. But they don't show you how to think this text like I do. As far as I'm aware, I am the only person who has anything of this quality. And so I will release like somewhere around like the first, say, 16 paragraphs for free. And the rest of it I will leave for, you can see the quality of the work, and you can give me some money, because I do deserve some money for this. There's nothing like it. We've already gone like over 18, for example. Let me read to you section 18. You can look at it yourself as the Miller or the Oxford or whatever, and check this out. 18 is actually pretty short. So let's go over real quick. I want you to see this. Fox PDF. Okay, here we go. So look at this, okay? Check this out. So here's 18. The living substance is, moreover, being which is in truth subject. By the way, also this highlighted PDF, and I'm not doing anything else other than just highlighting things for one to notice. I will also give this out for free for a little bit, but then if anybody wants it, they can pay me. The living substance is, moreover, being which is in truth subject, or what comes to the same thing, being which is in truth actual, only insofar as it is the movement of self-positing, or is a mediation of becoming other to itself with itself. As subject, substance is pure simple negativity, and for this reason the bifurcation of the simple, or the opposing location, which is again the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its opposition. It is only this self-restoring equality, or reflection into itself in otherness, not an original unity as such, or immediate unity as such, that is the true. The true is the becoming of itself, the circle that presupposes its end as its goal and has its end as its beginning, and is only actual through implementation and its end. All right, and now let me show you my comment on that. So 18, as you could see, it's a series of defining identities in rapid fire. The green highlights were all the identities in that paragraph. Substance is subject, is living. Why? Because the subject is the soul, which is what enlivens matter. Yeah, this is just a classical philosophy thing. If you knew anything about classical philosophy from Plato or Aristotle, you would already know soul, life, easy. The average person already connects the soul to life. He mentioned that it was the soul, therefore you already know that it's living. Being is truth. This is simple, though we almost never have a reason to reflect on it. It's the common belief we all have. The truth is the objective fact itself, not just our correct claims about it. Being is the actual. Again, a common prejudice of ours, though we commonly use the word existence for it. Being or truth is the movement of self-positing. This is a curveball, to be sure. Unlike so much else, the resources to imminently explain it in the text are not at hand here. But what else is commentary for? Later, in the explication of the concept in this preface, Hegel will describe a self-generating simplex, a whole with parts. Being puts itself as it is, posits itself, nothing else can do this for it. Hegel here merely declares it as a movement. This is itself proven along the way, so keep it in mind. Being is the mediation of its self-othering, becoming other to itself, as Inwood says, with itself. And this is clear as mud. What is meant here is this. Self-othering is the activity, the subjective side, and being is here the substance. True being, and so truth itself, is the mediation of the subject-substance dialectic, is their cleaving from and to each other like two sides of a coin. This is upheaval. It is a cancelling or overturning of the absolute claim and independence of each side, their upholding and their uplifting in a higher unity that is a unity in difference, a cleavage. So I'm coining this thing cleavage. But for those of you who don't know, it is generally unknown. Cleave in English actually has two meanings that are contrary. One of them is like overwhelming the main meaning, which is to cut things apart, to split them. But there's also another meaning, which is to put things together, to attach them. So I'm using cleavage here for unity in difference because that's exactly what that word does in English. It's pretty nice. If you notice, a couple months ago, I posted the list on speculative English words and phrases. I have been increasingly using those because why in the hell wouldn't we use those? It's like the most obvious thing to do. It makes this guy's losing it with the word games, going off the deep end. Nah. It's pretty straightforward. So anyways, subject is pure simple negativity. How so? In common thought, it is said that subjects act and objects are acted upon. To act is to change, and to change is to negate. We are subjects not only in our acting, originating our acting, but in resisting, denying the imposition of change upon us by objects and by other subjects. Someone who cannot say no to anything or anyone is a pushover, becomes an object for others to use. That is why the subject is pure negation. Abstracted to a pure universal, the subject is the active power of substance which cleaves its universality, its unity, into particulars. It generates the minimal distinction, which doubles substance into opposites, and as negation overturns the indifference of particulars as well as their extreme opposition. That is, it is their complete upheaval, the complete self-articulation and fixing, holding fast and repairing of the whole. The subject is thus this self-rupturing and self-restoring equality, it buckles itself as both a collapse and fastening together. So I would go on to the next one, which actually is like the most crazy out of them all in that section. But we are at 4 p.m. and we are going to start the actual reading, which is in section 48. So all done. Let me set up things in my Discord. Because by the way, I'm in. I do have a Discord channel that I run this on. So I'm gonna give it a couple minutes for people to show up in there. Well, as we're waiting for other people, I can. By the way, I wrote this all yesterday, about like 20 paragraphs. I was one. I had a free day at last, and so I used it to its maximum. So here's something that you wouldn't understand, and this is what a commentary really is for, right? It's to expand on things that aren't that obvious. So Inwood does say the subject, well, Hegel says the subject is a reflection into itself and otherness. So this is here a mere declaration, but Hegel will explicitly state the missing identity layer as that of self-consciousness, which he does. The meaning of this is complex. Alpha, it is ontological since the other of the subject is substance. The thing or object, which is an inwardly directed and enclosed implicit subject, an activity fully absorbed in itself. That is, the subject in the form of otherness, substance, is immediately reflected into itself. So, beta, it is ontological in a second sense that has already been established in prior paragraphs. The subject is the very process producing the otherness, difference, and its return to itself as identity, as otherness upheaved. Gamma, it is epistemic. What the subject apprehends in its other, substance, is itself. That is, it is reflected back into itself in knowing it. Why? Because the truth in objects that thinking reveals is their concept, which is their subjectivity as acting power. This is proven in chapter 3, which is Force and Understanding. And delta, finally, it is methodological in that the subject is the knower, the knowing, the known, and the system of their production. Thus, the subject is the totality of a form of consciousness in the pure form that is absolute knowing. Thus, truth is the becoming of itself because it is the change that only ever winds up both as the end of action and the beginning of action. In becoming other, it only remains itself. It is alpha and omega to itself. Quote, the circle that presupposes its end as its goal and has its end as its beginning and is only actual through implementation and its end. So, yeah, compare that to anything you may find, and I don't think there's anything like this. See, Jimmy Torsen, is English better than German for such words with speculative spirit? No, not necessarily. The neat thing is that we do have such words, but Hegelian scholars, for whatever reason, have decided not to use them. It's really odd because they're actually common. They're not even like, oh, these are weird words. They're not. You know, upheaval, like, honestly, is a little bit weird. The only I hear it like about once a week, but only because I watch like a lot of political stuff, and so it comes up as a description of, you know, political upheavals. Other than that, you know, you almost never hear upheaval other than, you know, there are like physical upheavals like earthquakes and disasters. But that is a pretty rare word. But buckle it's a common word. Winding up, that's a common phrase. Fixing, for example, has double meanings. You know, to hold fast, to hold something still, but also to repair it. That's common. Not all of these are contronyms, but you have like words that have like multiple ranges of use. That like also like bound, for example. A thing is bound as, you know, like being restricted, but it's also bound as being in motion towards something. So bound is contradictory as well, and I use that too. Like literally, the finite is bound to the infinite in the double sense. It is both restricted by it, but also its purpose, its end, is to transition towards the infinite. Can I give an inspiring external reflection on the necessity of holistic truth? No. We don't do external reflections on my channel, and we don't do edification either. That's for something else. You want edification, you go talk to a preacher or something. All right, it's been almost 10 minutes. If anybody's going to show up, they should have showed up by now. So we shall begin. By the way, is my sound okay? I know some people have complained about the mouth noises. I'm gonna. Why is the truth the whole? We've already gone over that. Like, literally just watch the prior videos. Like, I'm not going to repeat myself. The imminence is imminent. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I do have some articles, like the Philosophy of Freedom set of articles on the Empyrean Trail are basically like kind of motivational. Go read those. I actually have one of those on this channel, don't I? What's the title? YouTube. Yeah, I do think I have the Philosophy of Freedom, Freedom and Power, the Idea of Philosophy, The Wise and the Free. Go check that one out if you want edification. But anyways, you know, you guys are more interactive on YouTube than the people on Discord. That's kind of crazy. As you can tell, like when I'm reading on Discord, even if we have like 10 people there, nobody types or says anything. So anyways, we're going to get started. If you have any questions, please ask in the side chat. There is a bit of delay. I think it's like about a minute. So if I don't answer immediately, it's because of that. But yeah, I am looking. I do have the chat open. I will see what you say. So please go ahead and ask stuff. I am more than happy to stop and explain whatever it is that you need explained. That's what the whole group aspect is for. Otherwise, I would just do this alone and record myself, which is what it has felt like for like the last few sessions, quite honestly. So thank you for interacting. That helps a lot in motivating me. But for those of you who don't know, hello, I am Antonio Wolf. hit that like button. I am recording this on my side just in case. You never know when the recording drops. But we are continuing on section 48 of the Phenomenology Spirit by, well, the Oxford translation by Inwood. For those you don't know, you see this, I have a nice little edited PDF that I have made where I have changed some words around to my liking. Sublation to upheaval. Being there to existence, existence to concrete existence, and I have added headings to thematic sections. So the last time we left it with the critique of mathematics. Now we go on to what is basically the beginning of the introduction of the method itself. And if you already paid attention in the prior stuff, I have pointed out to you where Hegel is literally just like telling you what the method is and how to do it multiple times. But somewhere about like the next 20 sections are going to be like all about that. So 48. It might seem necessary to specify in advance the main features of the method of this movement or of science, but its concept already lies in what we have said, and its proper exposition belongs to logic, or rather it is a logic itself. For the method is nothing but the structure of the whole set out in its pure essentiality. It's interesting stuff. But as for the views on this matter that have been prevalent until now, we must not forget that the system of ideas relating to the nature of philosophical method also belongs to a defunct culture. If this should sound boastful or revolutionary, a tone that is far from my intention, we should bear in mind that the scientific finery offered by mathematics, with its explanations, classifications, axioms, sequences of theorems, their proofs, principles and derivation of the consequences and conclusions from them, is in the general opinion already obsolete at the very least. Even if its unsuitability is not clearly seen, little or no use is made of it anymore, and if people do not disapprove of it in itself, they are nevertheless not fond of it. And we must harbor this prejudice in favor of excellence, that it finds a use for itself and wins popularity. But it is not hard to see that the fashion of advancing a proposition, adducing reasons for it, and in the same way refuting the opposite propositions by reasons, is not the form in which truth can emerge. So this stuff about, well, nobody takes math seriously anymore. Like, obviously that's bullshit. You know that. He knew that. What's he talking about? Is he talking about math in the eyes of the average person? No, he's talking about math in the eyes of philosophy. Particularly it's a dig at Spinozism. Spinoza used the geometric method to present his philosophy. Maybe like 2 or 3 people tried the same style after him, but then everybody just kind of went like, this is not it. So it's more of a historical dig. So, truth is a movement. Oh, by the way, yes, you see this? So this is not a new paragraph. It's not a numbered paragraph. But this paragraph was ungodly big. So I decided to add paragraph breaks for readability. So that's what's also in my little edited PDF. If you want it, send me a message. Send me an email. I'll send it to you. I won't post it here because, well, technically this is copyrighted stuff. So I don't want to get in trouble with the censorship bureau here. Truth is a movement of itself inside itself, whereas this method is the cognition that is external to the material. So that's important. Truth is a movement of itself inside itself. So it's absolute. That is why this method is peculiar to mathematics, and must be left to mathematics, which, as we noted, has the unconceptual relationship of magnitude as its principle, and dead space and the equally dead unit as its material. This method may also, in a freer style that is blended more with willfulness and contingency, remain in ordinary life, in a conversation or historical instruction, for the sake of curiosity more than cognition, more or less like a preface too. Oh, that is a high dig if I've ever seen one. Mathematics is just a preface to thinking, guys. It's just a preface to philosophy. In ordinary life, consciousness has for its content information, experiences, sensory concretions, also thoughts, principles. In general, whatever it regards as available or as a fixed and stable being or essence. Sometimes consciousness follows where this leads. Sometimes it interrupts the connection by exercising free willfulness over such content and conducts itself as an external determination and management of the content. It traces the content back to some certainty or other, even if it is only the sensation of the moment, and conviction is satisfied when it has reached a familiar resting place. Ah, yes, Jimmy Torsen, you're right about that. It's not just a dig at Spinoza. Plato also believed in the form of mathematics to be like the ultimate form of truth, to be the exemplar of how philosophy should try to show itself par excellence, which never worked out. So, 49. But if the necessity of the concept banishes the looser gait of ratiocinative conversation, as well as the stiffer gait of scientific pomp, we have already pointed out above that their place is not to be filled by the non-method of presentiment and aspiration, and by the willfulness of prophetic utterance, which despises not only that type of science, but the scientific approach in general. Yeah. Pretty clear, self-explanatory. Could I expand on the difference between maths and philosophical thinking? Well, that is something that was already expanded in the last session. So the prior sections from like 38 to 47 are a long commentary on what is the deficit of mathematics and what is the distinction with philosophy. And here we're getting to a more of what philosophy itself is. Issue, so I'm not going to go over that. Ratiocinative is rationality, yes. Let's see. Antonio comments, in The Republic, Plato presents math as a sort of prelude to philosophy. His complaint is essentially that mathematics only gets out of objects what the thinkers posit in them. Whether or not he actually did dialect is another matter. Well, mathematics is a prelude to philosophy only in that geometry was considered a requirement. If you can't think geometrically, there's no way you can think philosophically. And geometry is the link between the sensuous and the abstract. So in that way, if by mathematics we mean geometry, which is what kind of was generally meant back then, yeah, mathematics is a prelude, but also then the certainty of and the universal necessity of what was understood in mathematics, that was also the ideal of what philosophy was itself supposed to do. Yeah, Plato didn't do Hegel's type of dialectics, that's for sure, though he did engage in dialectics in a different sense. As a matter of fact, in my latest article here, I'll link it in case. My latest article on the Empyrean Trail on negative dialectics, which it's not a new article, but it's a huge revision. goes over what's the difference between the ancient dialectic of Plato, Nagarjuna, the modern dialectic of Kant, those work, and what's different about those compared to Hegel's own dialectics, and how we may say that Hegel does or does not have a negative dialectic. For those of you who don't know, if you don't follow the Hegel scene, there is a significant swath of people that go ahead and say that Hegel is ultimately just a negative dialectician, that there is no positive conclusion or unity. Everything just falls apart in contradictions. This is what Zizek says. This is what the followers of Zizek said, like Todd McGowan and his followers. This is what followers of Adorno say, like Jay Bernstein. Jay Bernstein literally says that the conclusion of phenomenology, spirit with absolute knowledge, is literally skeptical, that we don't know, that the only thing we end up knowing is that we don't actually know anything, and worse, not only that we don't know, but that we can't know anything, that there can't be such a thing as knowledge in the way that Hegel wants it, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, Adorno didn't say that, but I've heard this from multiple people now, so it must be some kind of sect of people who had some teacher that was the same, because they say the same thing, and it's just wild. Anyways, we'll continue on with section 50. Kant rediscovered triplicity, and though he found it only by instinct, and it was in his hands still dead, still unconceptualized, it has since been elevated to its absolute meaning, so that the genuine form is at the same time displayed in its genuine content, and the concept of science has emerged. Nevertheless, we sometimes see this form used in a way that degrades it to a lifeless schema, to a veritable shadow, reducing scientific organization to a chart. This use, too, is not to be regarded as anything to do with science. So here's, people bring it up, well, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And people are like, actually, that's Fichte. And then some people, actually, that's Kant. This is a quote that is worth having in your pocket to tell people, no, Hegel, you can't formalize the speculative method. So this formalism, of which we have already spoken generally and whose style we wish here to specify in more detail, supposes that it has comprehended and expressed the nature and the life of a shape when it has affirmed of it some determination of the schema as a predicate. It may be subjectivity or objectivity, or again magnetism, electricity, etc., contraction or expansion east or west, and the like. This can be multiplied to infinity, since in this way each determination or shape can be used again as a form or moment of the schema in the case of the other determination or shape, and each can gratefully perform the same service for the other. A circle reciprocity by which one does not experience what the thing itself is, not what the one is, nor what the other is. Here, sometimes sensory determinations are taken up from ordinary intuition, and they are supposed, of course, to mean something other than what they say. Sometimes what is in itself meaningful, the pure determinations of thought, such as subject, object, substance, cause, the universal, etc., are used just as indiscriminately and uncritically as they are in ordinary life, and as are strengths and weaknesses, expansion and contraction, so that this metaphysics is as unscientific as these sensory representations. Here he's kind of talking, he might be referring to stuff like Jakob Böhme, where Jakob Böhme takes like sweetness, sourness, bitterness, pain, and like he makes some like these metaphysical structures of reality. This prior sentence, let me read this. So we have the formalism of opposites, or when it is affirmed of it, the expressive nature and the life of a shape, when it has affirmed of it some determination of the scheme as a predicate. So we can take predicates. This can be multiplied to infinity, since way each determination or shape can be used again as a form or moment of the schema in the case of the other determination or shape, and each can gratefully perform the same service to the others. Okay, so you can apply categories to each other. You can apply subjectivity to objectivity, objectivity to subjectivity, predicate them of each other. So it forms a circle of reciprocity by which one does not experience what the thing itself is. (51) Instead of the inner life and the self-movement of its existence, such a simple determinacy of intuition, that is, in this case, sensory knowledge, is now expressed according to a superficial analogy. And this external and empty application of the formula is called construction. The case with this sort of formalism is the same as with any other. What sort of blockhead would someone have to be if he could not be taught in a quarter of an hour the theory that there are asthenic, sthenic, and indirectly asthenic diseases, and as many types of cure, and if he could not hope, since until quite recently such instruction still sufficed for the purpose, to be transformed in this short time from a family doctor into a theoretical physician? When the formalism of the philosophy of nature teaches, say, that the intellect is electricity, or the animal is nitrogen, or again, equal to the south or north, etc., or represents it by a proxy, whether as baldly as it expressed here or concocted with more technical terminology, then inexperience may be overcome by admiration and amazement at such force, which grasps together the seemingly remote, and at the violence that the inert sensory undergoes through this combination, a violence that imparts to the sensory the semblance of a concept but shirks the main thing, which is to express the concept itself or the meaning of the sensory representation. Inexperience may venerate in all this a profound genius. It may delight, too, in the luster of such determinations, since they replace the abstract concept with intuitive clarity and make it more gratifying, and it may congratulate itself on the kinship of soul it feels with such a splendid performance. One of those polemical paragraphs. The blockhead insult is funny. But we've all seen this. As a matter of fact, this is what pop philosophy is. It's just like, hey, come watch my 30-minute video on this really deep philosophical thinker, and he thought this and he said that. And, ideas exist in some other realm, of course, ha ha ha, isn't that funny? And then a guy comes out, what's the guy's, that one? There's a conservative moron, James Lindsay. Let me see. Is it James Lindsay? Yeah, James Lindsay, for example, is one of these types of morons who has watched or taken a class where they have gone over this, and they're like, well, Hegel thinks this, and it's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And, Hegel thinks that everything is just one giant world spirit, which is God, that, just controls everything like a puppet, and so on and so on. And people legit think, well then, I don't need to read this Hegel guy. Like, I already know what he says. Like, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that's all just stupid shit. Who believes in contradictions? You have to be a blockhead, a moron to believe that. Ha ha ha. But anyways, Hegel contra pop philosophy. And you can see this was a long paragraph. By the way, if you look at the German, so there you can find the original German online for the Phenomenology and the Science of Logic, both volumes. Germans apparently just did not believe in paragraph breaks, man, because the average paragraph for Hegel is like 2 pages long, almost. That's crazy. So, like in the English versions, we have these nice paragraph breaks, which are definitely not in the original. So, the knack of this kind of wisdom is as quickly learned as it is easy to practice. The repetition of it, when it is familiar, becomes as insufferable as the repetition of a conjuring trick already seen through. The instrument of this monotonous formalism is no harder to handle than a painter's palette having only two colors, say red and green, and the red for coloring the surface when a historical scene is required, the green for landscapes. It would be hard to decide which is greater here, the ease with which everything in heaven and on earth and under the earth is coated with this broth of color, or the vain pride in the excellence of this universal recipe. Each supports the other. This method sticks the few determinations of the universal schema onto everything heavenly and terrestrial, on all natural and spiritual formations, in this way classifying everything, and what it produces is nothing less than a report as clear as daylight on the organism of the universe, that is, a chart resembling a skeleton with bits of paper stuck on it, or like the cows of closed boxes, or like the rows of closed boxes, with labels attached in a spice cellar stall. I wonder if that clear as day is an allusion to Fichte. Fichte has an essay called, a clear as day report to the German people, or something like that, which is like one of his versions of his system. And the title itself is funny because it's German. It's really long, and it's also clearly really butthurt. Because he was mad that people kept not understanding him. So he's like, okay, look. Oh, you guys are on Discord. You should have pinged me. There we go. Well, you guys have the PDF, and you know what section I'm on, so you could have followed. All right. Also, for this thing of, just take a category and just slap it on everything. Well, who does that? Who does that? Think about it. Well, everybody does that, including quote-unquote Hegelians. Most self-styled Hegelians, both academically recognized, with PhDs and not with PhDs, love to do this thing. Like, oh, this thing's a negation here, and that's, the dialectic there. The Marxists do this all the fucking time. It's annoying as hell. And it's just dumb. It's just stupid. I mean, once you figure out by listening to people like me, how this works and what it is, you realize that those people are just saying nothing of interest. It's not very deep, and so what? You can talk about opening and closing your door as a contradiction, but why would you want to do that? We have already remarked, the chart is as clear as each of these, and just as in the first case flesh and blood has been removed from the bones, while in the second case the thing, also bereft of life, is hidden in the boxes, so too the chart has left out or hidden the living essence of the thing. We have already remarked that this approach at the same time culminates in monochrome, absolute painting. Ashamed of the distinctions of the schema, it submerges them as belonging to reflection in the emptiness of the absolute, so that pure identity, formless white, is produced. This uniform coloring of the schema and of its lifeless determinations, this absolute identity and the transition from one to the other, are all alike dead understanding and all alike external cognition. Erdi Kalash, are you having a stroke there, buddy? Section 52. Excellence cannot escape the fate of being thus robbed of life and a spirit, of being flayed and then seeing its skin wrapped around lifeless knowledge and its vanity. But that is only part of the picture. In this very fate we can discern the power that excellence exerts on hearts, if not on minds, as well as the development to universality and determinacy of form, in which its perfection consists, and which alone makes it possible for this universality to be used in a superficial way. Somebody asks about, I assume the prior paragraph, modern physics and math are this way. No, this slapping of categories on things, it doesn't apply to physics either, unless you're talking about physicists who don't know how to stay in their own lane. Physicists who go and say, like, oh man, everything's just atoms. Physics is the queen of the sciences. Everything reduces to physics. All your thoughts and all your feelings, that's nothing but a bunch of like quantum fluctuations. We'll figure out the equation one day and we can poke and prod you and move you as we like a robot. If that's what you are asking about, yeah, that's a kind of version of just let's slap a concept on everything because, it's easy to say things. It's easy to say like, oh, well, that can't be a miracle, or that, that anomaly doesn't actually disprove that we're doing. We'll figure out what it actually is, in the future. And everything will be honky-dory. We're going to find out that we were always right all along. That materialism was always true. Einstein was never wrong. We have never lost ourselves in the mire of stupid abstractions. So, 52 already did that. Not much else to say about that. Section 53. Science has to organize itself only by the concept's own life. The determinacy that is taken from the schema and externally stuck onto existence is, in science, the self-moving soul of the fulfilled content. The movement of that which is consists, on the one hand, in becoming an other to itself. So, okay, here we begin the actual exposition of the method. So, science is to organize itself only by the concept's own life. We already know that. The determinacy that is taken from the schema and externally stuck onto existence is, in science, the self-moving soul of the fulfilled content. So, not the schema, but the determinacy that is taken from the schema. So, that determinacy is the self-moving soul of the fulfilled content. So the movement of that which is consists, on the one hand, in becoming an other to itself. We already have seen that. And so becoming its own immanent content. This is new. So we've seen before the whole becoming other, self-othering, but now this, becoming its own immanent content. We have seen this, but stated in the form of reflection into itself. On the other hand, that which is takes back into itself this unfolding of this existence of itself. That is, it makes itself a moment and simplifies itself into determinacy. So it's a reflection into itself, but on the other hand, that which is takes back into itself this unfolding, and its unfolding is the negation which creates differences, or this existence of itself. Existence is being that is not, so it's a distinguished being. That is, it makes itself a moment and simplifies itself into determinacy. That regards the whole. So the first part, becoming an other to itself, is becoming its own immanent content. That's the internal differentiation of the thing. The second one is how this total self-differentiation, when we consider it as like, developing outwards, is taken back in. What are examples? Take a tomato plant, for example. The tomato is the seed which grows, germinates, matures as the plant, grows leaves, grows flowers, grows fruit. In the fruit is the seed. In every part, you have the entirety of the plant, really, in the whole thing, like in each part. In each part, if you just took the roots of the plant, you cut off everything else, but you put it in proper soil and water, it will just regrow the entire whole plant again. If you take the seed, it will just regrow the entire whole plant again. You can even take a leaf cutting and get it to root, and it will regrow the whole plant again. You can take the fruit, which has the seeds included. It will regrow the whole plant again. The whole plant is in each moment. It's concretized as a single determination. It's a simple determinacy. And the determinacy is an existence, which is an existent, which is a singular being. Am I saying something clear? Let me know in the chat over there. Because once you get into like technical Hegelese, it's hard not to go in these word circles. All right, I see no comments on the site, so I'm just going to continue. If you guys have any questions or want me to go over it again, just let me know in the side chat. In the first movement, negativity is the distinguishing and the positing of existence. We know that because by negating, you distinguish one being from another, which is exactly what existence is. Existence is being that is not another. So, in this return into itself, it is the becoming of the determinate simplicity. Now that's a hard one to explain. Look, if you say, could you just repeat that, please? I'm not going to do that. You need to tell me exactly what you need me to repeat, because just saying, well, I didn't understand the whole thing. Could you just go over the whole thing again? No. Tell me a sentence, tell me some term that you didn't understand, and I can do that, but I can't go over the whole thing, because I'm just going to say this exact same thing. And if I'm going to do that, you can just literally right now, as you're watching live, hit back, like about the last couple minutes and listen to that on your own. I'm not going to waste my breath doing that. So in the first movement, negativity is the distinguishing the positive resistance. We know that. In this return into itself, it is the becoming of the determinate simplicity. That's an odd one because the simple negativity of producing existence is not yet a return into itself. But, never mind how that connects to this prior part. This seems to be actually just referring to what is in the prior sentence, that in the return into itself of the thing, it is the becoming of the determinate simplicity. That just seems like a needless repetition on his part. He's basically just saying what he said in the prior sentence, again, oddly enough. So, never mind that. It is in this way that the content shows that its determinacy is not received from something else and fastened on it, but it gives determinacy to itself and ranges itself by itself to a moment and to a place in the whole. So, another recapitulation of what the whole method and movement of reality does. So we already know. So He hasn't said this. I mean, it's kind of implicit because he's mentioned the absolute before, and he's mentioned, we're trying to understand the absolute, okay. But if you don't keep that in mind, why in the world would you take this whole view that the whole thing needs to be self-produced? Like in clearly what seems to be implied to be an absolute sense. Well, you wouldn't. But this is referring to the method as absolute and to an object as absolute. So insofar as it really is absolute, it has to be completely self-determined. It can have nothing from outside. That word ranges, that's an odd phrasing. Ranges itself by itself. Let's see what Miller says. 53. So it is in this way that the content shows that its determinateness is not received from something else nor externally attached to it, but that it determines itself and arranges itself as a moment. Oh. Okay. Well, we know what a range is, but like it's just an odd way to phrase things. Now, let me know in the comments if you've ever heard anybody use that word that way. The tabular understanding keeps for itself the necessity and the concept of the content, keeps for itself what constitutes the concreteness, the actuality, and living movement of the thing that it arranges, or rather, it does not keep this for itself. It is not even aware of it, for if it had this insight, it would surely reveal it. All right, that's a critique of the understanding. Range is like, it's not a weird word, like in that, like, I don't know what it means. It's just a weird word in that, like, usually that's not how you see that word used, even though you can use it that way. Jimmy Tillerson, never heard range used like that. Can't say I get his meaning. No, like it's range. Like, like a ranger is somebody who goes about and, moves about or goes through a certain spread of land, like just like Antonio Limonetto said. Yeah, spread. It's a spread. It's like a movement, particularly a spread that is a moving spread. You're moving through it. So let me just go over that critique of the understanding again. So the tabular understanding keeps for itself the necessity and the concept of the content, keeps for itself what constitutes the concreteness, the actuality, and the living movement of the thing that arranges. Or rather, it does not keep this for itself. It is not even aware of it, for if it had this insight, it would surely reveal it. So the meaning of it keeps for itself here is that the necessity of the development of the object, which should, in a scientific understanding, be explained as belonging to the object from the object itself, is in the understanding kept for the understanding, that development and movement is grasped as is understood to be only the understandings, that it's my thinking that does the separating, it's my thinking that qualifies, it's my thinking that unifies. That's why he says, or rather, it does not keep this for itself. It is not even aware of it, for if it had this insight, it would surely reveal it. It is not even aware of the need for such insight. Otherwise, it would abandon its schematizing, or at least realize that it is no more use to it than a table of contents. A table of contents is all that the understanding gives. The content itself, it does not supply. And this is a direct insult against Kant. Kant has the table of categories. And Hegel is basically saying here, yeah, Kant's philosophy is really nothing but that table of categories. Like everything else is just, Which, a Kantian would go and say, well, that's unfair. That's not exactly true. There's a lot more to Kant than the table of categories and the table of judgments. Empirically, that's true, yes. But this is a polemical work. Even when the determinacy, one such as magnetism, for example, is in itself concrete or actual, it is still reduced to something dead, since it is only predicated of another existence and not cognized as immanent life of this existence, or as having its native and peculiar self-generation and presentation in this existence. To add this main thing is something the formal understanding leaves to others. Instead of entering into the immanent content of the thing, the understanding always surveys the whole and stands above the singular existence of which it speaks. That is, it does not see it at all. Scientific cognition, by contrast, requires one to surrender to the life of the object, or what amounts to the same thing, to focus on and express its inner necessity. Immersing itself thus in its object, scientific cognition forgets that survey, which is merely the reflection of knowledge away from the content and into itself. But engrossed in the material and moving forward along with it, scientific cognition does not return into itself, but not before the feeling or content withdraws into itself, simplifies itself into determinacy, reduces itself to one side of an existence, and passes over into its higher truth. In this way, the simple, self-surveying whole itself emerges from the wealth in which its reflection seemed lost. Jimmy Tillerson, Hegel accuses Kant of not deriving the categories. He says that Fichte is the first to attempt to derive the categories. Well, Kant derives them, but he derives them from the structure of grammar, does he not? He derives them from the structure of the subject, object, predicate of judgments. Whereas Fichte, I think, does a concept-to-concept derivation of the categories, or at least he tries. I don't know about that, honestly, because I've only read like the introductions in the first chapter of the Wissenschaftler, the science of knowledge. For some reason I thought I had something to say about an example of something I thought about for a second, and I completely forget. Yeah, okay, so Kant does it from judgments. Yeah, that's why Hegel says it's not a true derivation. The derivation he's talking about is an immanent derivation from one concept to another, one category to another. Okay, nothing to say about that. All right, we're heading into scientific method right here. The content returning to itself. Let me see. To add this main thing from understanding leaves to others, instead of entering to the immanent content of the thing, it does not see. Seems to focus expression, immersing itself less in its object. Survey which may reflect knowledge. Let's read after the scientific cognition. So scientific cognition, by contrast, requires one to surrender to the life of the object, or what amounts to the same thing, to focus on and express its inner necessity. Immersing itself thus in its object, scientific cognition forgets that survey, which is merely the reflection of knowledge away from the content and into itself. So basically, you got to get lost in the sauce. Forget that you're even doing an investigation. Just be in it. But engrossed in the material and moving forward along with it, scientific cognition does return into itself, but not before the feeling or content withdraws into itself, simplifies itself into determinacy, reduces itself to one side of an existence, and passes over into its higher truth. So there's a few ways that you can interpret this. Engrossed in the material and moving forward along with it, scientific cognition does return into itself. So this is alluding to how from consciousness we're going to get self-consciousness. In the Phenomenology of Spirit, the first 3 chapters of consciousness is always just dealing with the object of consciousness. It's not dealing with consciousness itself, and there is no question about what consciousness is or how it works as the primary thing, though it does happen, but it happens only as like, oh, well, we're trying to just keep this out. We're filtering this out of the object. By the end of chapter 3, just getting lost in the sauce of the object sends cognition or consciousness back to itself, and we get self-consciousness. Because what we find is that in the object, all we have is the projection of our own form of knowing, so we better focus on knowing, which is consciousness. But not before the feeling or content withdraws into itself, simplifies itself into determinacy, reduces itself to a one-sided existence, and passes over into its higher truth. When you're engaging in the method, you go into the object, you fill out the object with determinations, you give it internal difference. Once you finish that difference, the totality of that difference leads you either into a dialectic in which you're just going back in circles, and at that point, all you do is you step back, you're like, well, it is what it is, and at that moment is when you stepped away as into the relationship of existence. You are not the object that you're cognizing, and now that you're not focused on cognizing anymore, but you've finished it, you have the object now complete before you. The fact that you have the object as object there and you are here as the knower here puts you in the awareness of your own existent relationship. Neither of you are each other. So the object as a whole is taken as it just is the object as a whole. That's the simple determinacy. It simplifies itself into determinacy. It's a single one. It's a complex one, but still just a complex single one. So it reduces itself into one side of an existence. There's the object, here is the knower, and passes over into its higher truth. And the meaning of that, it comes up in chapter 3. It's basically the upheaval, the Aufhebung, sublation of both the subject-object divide. In this way, the simple, self-surveying whole itself emerges from the wealth in which its reflection seemed lost. And emphasis here on self-surveying. Why in the world would he be talking about self-surveying here when we're dealing with the thing? And I mean, he's mentioning the thing all this time. It's the thing. It doesn't really get into the thing. We need to get into the thing. We need to get lost in the thing. In this way, the simple, self-surveying whole. So what does that mean? Well, if at the end, when we go through the thing and we observe the thing and we apprehend the thing, we grasp it, and we stand in the existence relationship to the thing, and he says this passes over into its higher truth. Well, what is the higher truth? The higher truth is that the thing and me, the subject and the substance, aren't really separate. They can't be. We form a system with the very objects of cognition, which, if they are within the system and we are within that system, we form a dialectic. And in a way, the object brings me back to the subject, and I as subject can become object. then the subject and the object, or subject and substance here, are one and the same. So what were you surveying when you were surveying the thing? Yourself. Consciousness was surveying consciousness. That's why it is a self-surveying. It's a self-surveying whole. The self-surveying whole itself emerges from the wealth in which its reflections seem lost. So that's an anticipation of the structure of, well, what the phenomenology spirit will teach us. And just give me a second. Gotta close a window here. It's getting cold. Let me know if you have any comments or questions on that section before we move on. All right, continuing. So we're getting into like the specific scientific method. This section is like huge. Like, well, this theme is huge. It goes on. It's one of the longest ones. Along with the speculative proposition section is crazy. I didn't realize that like he went on that long on speculative propositions. That, or we can drop it here. Well, we've been going on for what, an hour? It's been an hour. So like this theme is finished, but this new theme it's a very long one. And what the heck? Let's keep going. Section 54. By the way, if you don't know, AI is pretty decent, LLMs nowadays, at like getting text and or like cleaning up the text of videos from, say, like YouTube. You know how YouTube has the auto script thing? The reason I mention like the sections explicitly is so that like then if you so want, and then I also do this occasionally as well whenever I need something, you can just take this video link, put it on an LLM and say, give me the script and give me the the timestamps for like when this section is specifically being talked about, and it will do that pretty well. So yeah. Make use of those things in your own personal life. They're tools. They're to be used. Section 54. In general, because, as we expressed it above, substance is inherently subject, all content is its own reflection into itself. What is that telling you? All knowing is absolute knowing. I realized this when I read chapter 3. It was one of my earliest reflections on that. I had read the preface. I had completely forgotten that he just straight out tells you. I mean, it's one thing to just tell you, right? It's another thing for you to go through a thing and realize that that is actually really the case. And it's only in the actual phenomenology that you find out that this really is the case. He's not just saying it. In the preface so far, we have him just stipulating certain things, we're just taking them for granted. And they are coherent. That's what I'm trying to show you. They are something that you can understand. But the proof is not yet here. The subsistence or substance of its existence is equality with itself. It's another important thing. The subsistence or substance of existence, equality with itself. Equality with itself is self-relationship, which is a self-enclosure, which is immediacy, self-mediation, which is being. Being is immediacy. Anything that is immediate is. For its inequality with itself would be its dissolution. Right. So the thing was not identical with itself. It did not close upon itself ontologically and semantically. It would just dissolve. It would fall apart. It's like a circle that never closes in on itself, and you have a circular structure. It's like the rim of a tire. A bicycle tire. If that metal rim is not like solidly closed on itself, it just collapses under its own weight. Equality with itself, however, is pure abstraction, and pure abstraction is thinking. Here is a very famous identity. When I say quality, I mean the simple determinacy. There's another identity. In virtue of the quality, an existent is distinct from another. It's another identity. Or is an existent another identity. It is for itself, or it subsists in virtue of the simple uniformity with itself. You could say this is another identity. So, equality with itself is subsistence or substance. Equality or immediacy, being, is pure abstraction. So pure abstraction is thinking. Okay? So when I say quality, I mean the simple determinacy. And so here's an identity. Okay, quality is determinacy. In virtue of the quality, an existence is distinct from another or is an existent. We already know that existence is the not being another. So quality, so if by virtue of quality an existence exists, what is quality? Quality is identical to exist. If you say something is qualified, you're basically saying it's existent. And it is for itself. So insofar as it is an existent, it is for itself. Why? Because if it is existent, it's separate from another, but in order to be separate from another, it has to be enclosed upon itself. It has to be identical to itself to be different from that other. Which means that if it's identical to itself, it's closed in upon itself. It is in equality with itself. And to be in relationship to oneself is to be, later on, for oneself. Or it subsists in virtue of the simple uniformity with itself too. So here, whenever he uses the for itself, or simplicity, or subsistence, all of these things are bound up. They are all in a way synonyms, but they're synonyms with slightly different flavors that are in the common speech, in our common use of these words. Not all of these are synonyms, but Hegel's making them synonyms in the way he's using them. But we also have common uses in which, like, the way that we commonly use them, we need to what is being meant here. And insofar as Hegel says stuff that what doesn't go along with our common use, we got to take what he says, because it's his philosophy and he's showing us what he thinks. As a good reader of philosophy, you need to always take yourself out of the equation, because you're not the one who's reading. You're not the one who wrote what you're reading, so you can't project your own thoughts on it. So just keep these identities in mind. There's been a whole lot of identities throughout this preface. You should do what I'm doing. Keep a highlight of them, keep a note of them somehow, and it will be very helpful to you. But it is thereby essentially the thought. So in a thing being qualified, in being existent, in being substantial, in being self-unified, a thing is really, essentially, the thought. What is a thought? It's a concept. Antonio Limonetto, I'm thankful for watching your video on quality this week. Oh yeah, if you've seen the stuff from the Science of Logic, if you read the Science of Logic, the first 2 chapters, a lot of this stuff you're like, oh yeah, like I already know this, and it's much easier to track it because it was so much like straightforward and in your face in the Science of Logic. So it is comprehended in this that being is thinking. So here it is. This is a famous. This is a very famous problem. So this is the source of the insight, which usually eludes the ordinary unconceptual talk about the identity of thinking and being. Okay. So this paragraph 54, you should put a little comment for yourself in whatever you have, whether it's your book or, write it on a notepad or something. Section 54. Hegel is telling us here that he has explained what the identity of being and thought is. Now, because the subsistence of the existent is equality with itself, or pure abstraction, it is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself its inequality with itself and its dissolution, its own inwardness and withdrawal into itself, its becoming. Let me do some quick highlights. So I'll reread this like once we're done with this paragraph. There's more to be said about this, but I need to see what he says afterwards. Because this is the nature of that which is, and insofar as that which is has this nature for knowledge, knowledge is not the activity that deals with the content as something alien, is not reflection into itself, away from the content. Science is not that idealism which took the place of the dogmatism of assertion as a dogmatism of assurance or the dogmatism of certainty of one's own self. On the contrary, since knowledge sees the content returning into its own inwardness, its activity is both absorbed in the content, for it is the immanent self of the content, and at the same time it has returned into itself, for it is pure equality with itself in otherness. Thus it is the cunning which, while seeming to abstain from activity, watches to see how determinacy in its concrete life, just where it supposes it is pursuing its own self-preservation and particular interest, is the reverse, a doing that dissolves itself and makes itself a moment of the whole. All right, let's go over this again. Just going to read the whole the section 54. Let's see if we can make clear what the identity of being and thought is. In general, because as we expressed it above, substance is inherently subject. So we already have that identity settled, or at least stipulated and somewhat explicated. All contents, it is its own reflection into itself. The subsistence and the reflection here, Hegel uses this word on purpose. Okay, reflection both has a cognitive, spiritual interpretation, which is reflection, which is a thinking, self-thinking, but it's also physical. A thing literally physically is reflected into itself. Its divisions within itself is nothing but a reflection of being itself. Being has a minimal determinate form, and well, what is in being? Well, being. Here's a being, there's a being, it's existent being, but it's still being. It's the same form, just reflected all the way down. It's like atoms made of atoms, cells made of cells. It's not crazy at all. It's actually pretty mundane. It is the way we see things already. Space is reflected into itself. Why? Because it's made of spaces. Time is reflected in time. It's made of moments of time. Yeah. Pretty quick and simple. So the subsistence or substance of its existence is equality with itself. So a thing is only insofar as it is self-identical, as is equal with itself. For its inequality with itself would be its dissolution. If it was not self-identical, it just wouldn't be. There wouldn't be a thing there. Think about an object in space, a spatial object, a geometric object that doesn't close in on itself. Is it actually an object? The answer is no. It's the boundary, the potential boundary, of an object, but it's not really an object because it's not an enclosed thing. There's nothing that subsists and endures within it or outside of it. It's just an arbitrary division, from here to there, but it doesn't enclose on anything. Just as a physical body would not be a body if it couldn't enclose itself spatially. And time would not be time if each moment of time did not enclose itself, was not identical with itself and different from another moment of time. So equality with itself, however, is pure abstraction. So the word abstraction, what is the word abstraction? It's to take a thing away from a whole. So insofar as things exist, they are abstracted. To be, in the regular everyday sense, to be a thing here, there, or anywhere, in any way, to be is to be abstracted. Take it quite literally. Like, there's nothing mysterious here. Hegel's not playing word games. It's not just like, oh, well, he means it in a very odd way. Plain, everyday English and probably plain, everyday German. And here is the linchpin. Pure abstraction is thinking. Now that is a bit of a language word game. We're taking the associations of abstraction in the way that we normally think of it. We associate abstraction particularly with thought. So here it is. So if pure self-relationship is pure abstraction is thinking. Now that's on the linguistic level that works pretty well. Now what about like with the semantic level? Like how do we actually understand this? Well, think about it. In the real concrete existence that you experience of anything, is anything really a pure, emphasis on pure self-identity? Can you really abstract an atom purely on its own, away from everything else, and have it still be an atom? The answer is no. You can't do that for anything concrete of that nature. Nothing sensuous, nothing physical, nothing temporal, nothing geometric, nothing can be abstracted in that way. Nothing is a pure abstraction. But can you do that with thinking? And the answer is absolutely yes. A lot of people will deny this, I know, and I'm simply claiming this here. I'm merely declaring it, I know. But this can be trivially proven. Being and nothing becoming in the science of logic, there you go. Those have no relationship to any external reality. They do not refer to any external reality. They do not refer to any symbolic order of language. It is a pure semantic self-relationship, and it completely is self-enclosed. It works. So insofar as we think of things in their singularity and their subsistence as being abstracted, and that the ultimate self-subsistence is that which can remain itself away from all other things, then what does that tell you? Then the only true and pure substance is thinking. And this is an insight as old as Plato. Plato's original reason for thinking that the forms, which are concepts, thoughts, were the actual and ultimate reality was because in the understanding of what knowledge is, we were looking for that which was substantial and, enduring. But everything of the senses, everything sensuous, everything spatial-temporal, and of feelings and of psyche, all of that comes and goes. It just ceases to be and comes to be. But it does not remain. It does not subsist. What are the only things that do remain and subsist? And Plato's insight was thoughts, forms. Forms are the only things that subsist. They are the only substantial things. I mean, when you understand this and how you can go from your everyday thinking and your everyday prejudices to get to that conclusion, it's crazy. It's crazy because you're like, how can things be so inverted to what we normally believe? And yet, just natural thinking will lead you to that conclusion. It takes a lot of thinking effort to convince yourself that the Platonic structure of reality is not the structure of reality. Because the Platonic structure of reality is one of the most obvious initial insights of it. So, basically, absolute being, pure being, there's a reason, by the way, why the logic starts with pure being. And Hegel doesn't just say being. He particularly makes sure you know that it's pure being. Because only thinking is actually pure being. It's pure substance. It's the only thing that endures universally, necessarily, does not change, does not cease to be. With some qualifications, of course. This is Hegel. So, when I say quality, I mean the simple determinacy. In virtue of the quality, an existent is distinct from another, or is an existent. It is for itself, or it subsists in virtue of this simple uniformity with itself. Okay, this is just a rearticulation of how the substance of a thing is singularly developed. But it is thereby essentially the thought. It is comprehended in this, that being is thinking. So let's go, okay. So when I say quality, I mean the simple determinacy. We already know that. It's just distinction. In virtue of the quality, an existent is distinct from another. All right. It is an existent. It is for itself, for its subsistent virtue is simple uniformity with itself. Okay, here's another layer. I'm going to add another layer to this. So it is for itself, or its subsistent virtue of this simple uniformity with itself. So when you have a thing that's qualified, an existent is distinct from another. So you got two existents. You have one existent here and another existent there. You have two existences. It is for itself. What is before one existence? Another existence. So what is before existence? If we take existence to be the structure of existence, generally. So the structure of existence is being that is not. When you go through that and you particularize it, being that is not is obviously implies that there's another being that is also not this being. So you have two. So you have general existence, then you have particular existence. Existence. Yeah. Can't hear the T. Existent. To existence. So one existent, which is particular general existence, and another existent, which is particular general existence. Existence relates to existence. So what is existence for? It is for existence. Existence is for existence, which is being for itself. Or it subsists in virtue of this simple uniformity of itself. What is existence difference to? Existence. An existent is different to another existent, but they're both existence. So the difference is itself the structure of existence, because they're not each other, because that's what existence is. But in not being each other, they are exactly the same thing. They are existence. So their difference is their unity, is their identity, their simple uniformity with itself. Let me know in the chat if this made any sense, because this is pure Hegelese. And like I said, we start going out in like word circles, but it's the only way to talk about it. And if you get it, you get it, and your mind should be blown, honestly. It's insane how consistent this is. It's insane how consistent this is. He did not have the science of logic worked out yet. He didn't have these concepts explicitly derived, as far as I know. And yet, they have the exact same consistency as they do later on. And the structure of the method is exactly the same. The way he describes it is exactly the same. Nothing changes from the phenomenology to the science of logic at all. Another thing. So the thing, the existence, is for itself. And if it is only for itself, I'll answer your question right now, Antonio. Let me finish this thought, because it's another layer added to this. So this existence, this thing, is now being treated as absolute. It is only for itself. But what is that? If it is only for itself, it has no relationship to anything else, it is then absolutely abstracted. But what is abstraction? Abstraction is thinking. So what is the thing? That's why he says, but if this is the case, if the thing really is only for itself, it is thereby essentially the thought. So in the first blue highlighted section here, he's pointing out the identity towards, with the structural analogy of abstraction. In that second sentence about quality and existence, he basically gives you a mini proof. This is a mini proof about why the thing has to be considered an abstraction. Because the thing is one abstracted to itself in its parts, but also, since it is only for itself, it is abstracted from everything else. It doesn't need anything else. It's not dependent on anything else. So it can be abstracted, so it can be thought. And the only thing that we know that does this is thought. Also, here's a second layer I was going to add. The only thing that we know that can be for itself is thought. Only thought is self-reflexive in this way. So there's a three-layered meaning to the identity of thought and being. By the way, the two of these I just came up with right now on the spot. Quite literally being inspired today. All right, so Antonio asked, what two existence have in common? Is there being distinguished from another existence, right? Yeah, and the distinguishing is itself existence, because existence is that distinguishing of not being another. So existence as a whole relates to the existence within it as existence. So it is for itself in the existence, and then the existence relates to each other as existence. So they are for each other as well. So, if you take it in the form of a consciousness, an existent beholds as its object what is for it, another existent, and by it knows existence, which is itself, because it too is an existent. So the whole thing goes back into the famous three-movement circle. You have the abstract universal existence. It is. To be is to not be another, which is existence. So it's an existent, and you have two existents, but then the existents themselves have the form of existence because they are not each other. So there you go. The famous identity is not crazy at all. Let's continue to the rest of it. But it is thereby essentially the thought. It is comprehended in this, that being is thinking. This is the source of the insight which usually eludes the ordinary unconceptual talk about the identity of thinking and being. And I'm going to set that a different color right there. Now, because the subsistence of the existent is equality with itself, or pure abstraction, it is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself, it's an equality with itself, and its dissolution. Okay, this is simple. So we have established that to be is to be substantial, which is already also to be abstracted, which is to be distinct, which is to exist. So, insofar as the subsistence of the existence is equality with itself, it is, but it is pure abstraction. But what is abstraction? Abstraction is to make the separation, to make an existent, to be existent, and to not be another, which is, that's why he says abstraction of itself from itself. You can also think about this in this way. Subsistence is pure abstraction, which is equality with itself, which is equality here is also self-relationship. So self-identity, identity is self-relationship, which is also self-operation or application. So if pure substance or pure existence is pure self-relation or pure abstraction, then pure abstraction relates to pure abstraction, which is what? It is the abstraction of itself from itself. Why? Because abstraction has distinguished itself from itself as an abstraction from an abstraction. You have two abstractions, they exist. Or it is itself its inequality. Exactly. So you have an existence, for example. You have existence. Existents are not each other, so they're unequal. So it's an equality with itself, and therefore is its dissolution. Right. In existence, existent. Let me just rephrase it. In an existent, existence dissolves because existence is general, whereas existent is particular and individuated. Its own inwardness and withdrawal into itself. So, or is itself its inequality with itself and its dissolution. Its own inwardness and withdrawal into itself. Its becoming. So in this way, the thing falls apart, but also the falling apart falls apart. So it falls apart out of itself, but then it goes back into its own, it dissolves that back into its own inwardness. It withdraws back into itself, in an abstraction, which is becoming. This whole process of, splitting and coming back together is just becoming. Being stops being, it is not. In not being, it is again. And as you have this flux, that is what becoming is. It's this movement of abstraction, abstracting from itself, creating two abstractions, and then abstracting from those abstractions back into general abstraction, which is The abstraction of abstraction has another name for it. It's concretion, which is becoming. And then how do things become concrete? Well, I mean, literally, I just said it. How do things concretize? They become through their becoming. Because this is the nature of that which is. And insofar as that which is has this nature for knowledge, knowledge is not the activity that deals with the content as something alien, is not reflection into itself away from the content. Science is not that idealism which took the place of the dogmatism of assertion. So this is the ancient dogmatism of classical philosophy. As a dogmatism of assurance, or the dogmatism, and the dogmatism of assurance is like the dogmatism of the Enlightenment epistemologists, be they empiricists or be they rationalists, or the dogmatism of certainty of one's own self. That's obviously a reference to Descartes, both a dogmatism, the reference to Descartes, and it also could be probably a reference to Fichte. So on the contrary, since knowledge sees the content returning into its own inwardness, its activity is both absorbed in the content, for it is the immanent self of the content. So knowledge is the activity of the thing, and it is the self of the content, which is the thing. And at the same time, it has returned into itself, for it is pure equality with itself and otherness. So when we know the thing, the knowledge is the same thing as the internal development of the thing itself. And since we've already established in prior sections that substance is subject, so the content is substance, and that knowledge is also the subject, what the subject is and what it does. So knowledge is selfhood. So if we have the knowledge of the thing, we have the selfhood of the thing, which is the subject of the thing, the active principle. At the same time, is returned into itself, for its pure equality with itself, for it is pure equality with itself in otherness. We have established that. Thus it is the cunning which, while seeming to abstain from activity, watches to see how determinacy and its concrete life, just where it supposes it is pursuing its own self-preservation and particular interest, is the reverse, and a doing so that it dissolves itself and makes itself a moment of the whole. So it's a phrasing of the cunning of reason. I actually never heard of this one. Well, I mean, you can understand why it's not, you wouldn't hear this. You hear about the cunning of reason in the philosophy of right and the philosophy of history because, it's kind of pretty catchy and kind of scandalous. But here, Hegel's saying, look, reasoning itself is just cunning. It's a cunning that reverses itself. You think you're doing one thing and you end up doing another thing. It's a reflex. It's an unintended consequence and movement. All right. Any comments, questions on that? We have been going for 2 hours now, since we started reading anyways. Well, 2 hours for the people on stream. Only an hour and a half for the people on the recording, if I need to make a recording. Yeah. All right, we can go for another paragraph. For those who are watching, what do you think so far? Is you finding this useful? You finding this revelatory? Say something to me. Because, I mean, it's been a long time since I've felt I've had any revelations from Hegel, honestly, reading philosophy in general. So I can't say that I remember what it's like to feel that anymore. But if this is your first time encountering these things, I wonder, one, if you find it intelligible, and two, if you do find it intelligible, like, I don't know, is there any insight that you feel that you get out of it? Just give me a quick minute.
Hey, W, are you there? Hi.
That's up, man. All right, we're going to read
Sorry.
one more section. We got time for that. Let's hope it's not as monstrous as it looks. Section 55. Earlier, we specified the significance of the understanding with regard to the self-consciousness of substance. We can now see clearly from what has been said here its significance with respect to the determination of substance as it simply is. Existence is quality, determinacy equal to itself, or determinate simplicity, determinate thought. This is the understanding of existence. Consequently, existence is nous. Which Anaxagoras was the first to recognize as the essence. His successors conceived the nature of existence more determinately as eidos, or idea, that is, determinate universality, kind. And this is very interesting because I don't see Hegel use this word, even though he makes a big deal out of it here. The expression kind may seem too commonplace and too slight for the ideas, for the beautiful and holy and eternal, which are all the rage nowadays. But in fact, the idea expresses neither more nor less than kind. But nowadays, we often see an expression which determinately designates a concept spurned in favor of one which, if only because it belongs to a foreign language, shrouds the concept in fog and hence sounds more edifying. Precisely because existence is determined as kind, it is simple thought. The nous, simplicity, is the substance. On account of its simplicity, or equality with itself, substance appears as fixed and enduring. But this equality with itself is also negativity. That is why the firm existence passes over into its dissolution. Okay, like I said earlier, remember, equality with self is self-relationship. In order to be in self-relationship to yourself, you must be different to yourself. So there must be negativity for there to be relationship, period. And if there's negativity, this is why the firm existence passes over into its dissolution. To be is to exist to have difference, to have negativity, and to have this whole process of becoming. At first, the determinacy seems to be what it is only because it is related to an other. and its movement seems to be imposed on it by an alien power. But it is precisely involved in this simplicity of thinking itself that the determinacy has its very otherness in it and its self-movement. For this simplicity is the self-moving and self-differentiating thought. It is its own inwardness, the pure concept. Thus, the intellectuality of the understanding is a becoming, and as this becoming, it is rationality. There we go. We have two major definitions here. So we have the definition of concept and the definition of rationality. Well, hey, Cactus. Haven't seen you in like a decade. Well, nice to see you. Anybody got questions about that? All right, we still got some time. I would have thought that section would be more, but we can do one more section then, or we'll go on till the end of the hour. Section 56. It is the nature of that which is, to be its own concept in its being, and it is in this nature that in general logical necessity consists. All right, here we have another identity. This alone is the rationality and the rhythm of the organic whole. It is knowledge of the content just as much as the content is concept and essence, or it alone is the speculative. There we go, another one. Bunch of identities. The concrete shape, moving itself, makes itself into a simple determinacy. It thereby raises itself to logical form, and is in its essentiality its concrete existence. Its concrete existence is just this movement, and is immediately logical existence. That is why it is unnecessary to impose formalism on the content externally. The content is inherently a transition to formalism, which ceases, however, to be this external formalism, since the form is the native becoming of the concrete content itself. All right, so these are expanding on the identity of thought and being. '57. So this is the nature of scientific method. First, to be inseparable from the content, and secondly, to determine its own rhythm by itself. As we have already remarked, this nature has its proper presentation in speculative philosophy, meaning logic. What we have said here does express the concept, but cannot count for more than an anticipatory assurance. Its truth does not lie in this partly narrative exposition, and is therefore just as little refuted by assuring us that, on the contrary, it is not so, and that such and such is rather the case, by calling to mind and reciting conventional ideas as if they were settled in familiar truths, or again by assuring us of novelties served up from the shrine of inner divine intuition. This sort of reception is usually the first reaction on the part of knowledge to something unfamiliar. It resists it in order to save its freedom and its own insight, its own authority from the alien authority, for this is the guise in which what is newly encountered first appears. Also, to get rid of the semblance that something has been learned and of the kind of shame this is supposed to involve. Similarly, when the unfamiliar is greeted with applause, the reaction is of the same kind and consists in what in another sphere was ultra-revolutionary speech and action. So this is I don't remember if he's talked about familiarity before. Maybe he's mentioned it like once or twice, which is that the familiar is like the least known because it is familiar, and people really like the familiarity, just like their family. So people don't like strangers. They don't like strange ideas, new ideas. And when they like strange and new ideas, they like them for very bad reasons. Yeah, here's talking about ultra-revolutionary speech. Revolutionaries always promise you a fix to all the ailments of your world if you can only just uproot the whole thing. Just get rid of the root of society, and that's the causing all the poison. And everybody's gonna be fine. We got the answers. We got the immortal science of dialectical materialism. We might make it all the way to the speculative proposition. No fucking way. Well, these have been simple, easy paragraphs. Section 58. The important thing, therefore, in the study of science is to take on oneself the exertion of the concept. This requires attention to the concept as such, to the simple determinations, for example, of being in itself, being for itself, equality with self, etc. For these are pure self-movements such as could be called souls if their concept did not designate something higher than soul. So concepts, souls. The concept is the soul of the thing, the self of the thing. The habit of running on in representations when it is interrupted by the concept finds it just as irksome as does formal thinking that ratiocinates back and forth in thoughts bereft of actuality. That habit should be called a material thinking, a contingent consciousness that is absorbed only in the stuff and therefore finds it painful at the same time to lift itself clear of the matter and to be together with itself. You've heard that famous quote about people who can't stand being silent, or people who can't stand being with themselves. I mean, this is basically a really high philosophical version of saying materialists are people who can't stand being with themselves. Save that quote. By contrast, the other mode, ratiocination, is freedom from content and vain condescension towards it. What is required of it is the effort to give up this freedom, and instead of being the willfully moving principle of the content, to submerge this freedom in it, to let the content move by its own nature, that is, by the self as its own self, and to contemplate this movement. Renunciation of personal intrusion into the immanent rhythm of concepts, avoidance of intervention in the rhythm with willfulness and wisdom garnered elsewhere, this abstention is itself an essential moment of attention to the concept. People hate to hear this. I say this all the time. It's true, though. Which is... there's actually a Reddit thread on the Hegel sub on Reddit. Just from these days, where somebody asked about, how to read the Phenomenology Spirit and some help, and I told them my view, which is like, they're like, well, I don't know who he's talking about. I find it confusing. And I'm like, look, you're wasting your time. Stop focusing on who said what and who is he talking about and what did they say and what's the history of this thing. It doesn't fucking matter. If he doesn't drop names, there's for a reason for it. If he's not telling who he's talking about, there's a reason for it, which is he wants you to focus on the abstract ideas. He doesn't want you to focus on the history, the sociology, the famous people, none of that. Anybody, and I will say this, I know that I am in the extreme minority, that anybody who tells you that in order to understand this book, you need so much background, you need to know so much philosophical history and blah, 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 and his cultural history, they're wrong. Like, it's just wrong. It's false. Hegel said, he said it multiple times in this preface, like, don't do that. Don't worry about like all this other external shit. You're supposed to get lost in the sauce of the concept, not lost in the sauce of the history of persons and personalities and beliefs, because concepts and beliefs are not the same thing. There's what a thinker may have believed in what they have written, but that's not the concept of what they're working with. Somebody, Cassius Andors, explain immanent thinking in your own words, please, that I might gain a clear insight. Immanent thinking is like this. If you're going to consider what, say, a tomato is, you're not going to consider like, well, what do I want tomatoes for? You want to know what the tomato is. What you want it for. Is it going to be for pasta? Is it going to be for salad? Do you just like the aesthetics of tomatoes, how they look, how they smell, how they taste? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter like who is it that discovered tomatoes, who first tamed the tomato and cultivated it. No. It doesn't matter when the tomato went across the ocean to God knows where. No. It doesn't matter who is currently the tomato master cook of the world. No. Does it matter who is currently the tomato expert in the world? No. Immanent thinking is, I want to know about tomatoes, just what a tomato is, what it is to be a tomato, and therefore I got to go look at the tomato. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It doesn't matter what they say, like, oh, we think tomatoes are derived from this other plant. It doesn't matter. We think tomatoes are related to this other thing. It doesn't matter. We think tomatoes are useful for this or that. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. What you want to know is, what is a tomato? And to do that, you got to just go and watch the tomato and like get your interest out of the way and just let the thing show itself to you. Get that seed, put it in the soil, water it, let it grow, see what it does. The thing will show itself to you as what it is. You don't have to do anything about forcing it to do anything. I mean, does that make sense? So, oh man, 60 is so long. Well, let's hope they're not very detailed. So, section 59. In the ratiocinative attitude, we need to pay more attention to the two aspects in respect to which conceptual thinking is opposed to it. First, it adopts a negative attitude towards the content it apprehends. It knows how to refute it and annihilate it. So, the ratiocinative attitude is the attitude of the understanding. It knows how to refute it and annihilate it. That something is not the case. This insight is the merely negative. It is a dead end that does not lead to a new content beyond itself. In order to have a content again, something else must be taken from somewhere. Ratiocination is reflection into the empty eye, the vanity of its knowledge. But this vanity expresses not only the vanity of this content, but also the vanity of this insight itself. For this insight is the negative that does not see the positive with itself. Because this reflection does not get its own negativity as its content, it never gets inside the thing, but is always beyond it. For this reason, it imagines that with its affirmation of the void, it is always way ahead of an insight rich in content. By contrast, in conceptual thinking, So by contrast, in conceptual thinking, as we have shown above, the negative belongs to the content itself and is the positive, both as the immanent movement and determination of the content and as the whole of this movement. Conceived as a result, it is what emerges from this movement, the determinate negative and consequently a positive content as well. And there we go. We have definition of determinate negation. So determinate negation is what? That which emerges from a movement. And 60. Oh, 60 is a beast. Section 60. But in view of the fact that such thinking has a content, whether of representations or thoughts or a mixture of both, it has another aspect which makes comprehension difficult for it. The remarkable nature of this aspect is closely connected with the above-mentioned essence of the idea itself, or rather it expresses the idea in its appearance as the movement which is thinking apprehension. Hold on, let me read that because I started from the beginning. But in the view of the fact that such thinking has a content, whether representations or thoughts or a mixture of both, it has another aspect which makes comprehension difficult for it. So the thinking is ratiocinative thinking, the understanding. The remarkable nature of this aspect is closely connected with the above-mentioned essence of the idea itself, or rather it expresses the idea in its appearance as a movement which is thinking apprehension. For whereas in its negative attitude, which we have just discussed, ratiocinative thinking is itself the self into which the content returns, in its positive cognition, by contrast, the self is a representative subject to which the content is related as accident and predicate. This subject constitutes the basis to which the content is attached and upon which the movement runs back and forth. Conceptual thinking adopts a different approach. All right, so let's do... well, not much to say to that. It's pretty clear in my view. Since the concept is its... somebody comments... in 59, I also take Hegel to be commenting on a particular kind of skeptical attitude whose existence is parasitic on there being something else to doubt. Yeah, I was thinking that too. I just didn't say it. It's clearly a lot of people say Pyrrhonian skeptics do this. I'll take their word for it. Continuing. Since the concept is the object's own self, which presents itself as its becoming, it is not a static subject which supports the accidents without moving. It is, on the contrary, the concept that moves itself and takes determination back into itself. In this movement, the static subject itself perishes. It enters into the differences in the content and it constitutes the determinacy. That is, the differentiated content as well as its movement, instead of remaining opposed to it. The firm ground which ratiocination has in the static subject therefore shudders, and only this movement itself becomes the object. The subject that fulfills its content ceases to go beyond it and cannot have any other predicates or accidents. Conversely, the dispersion of the content is thereby bound together under the self. The content is not the universal, which, free of the subject, would fit several. And so the content is, in fact, no longer a predicate of the subject. It is the substance. It is the essence and the concept of what we are talking about. Okay, that whole paragraph is actually worth keeping a note of. This is Hegel refuting, well, the procedures of thinking of the structure of objects in classical philosophy, particularly logic, the whole subject-predicate relationship. That's huge. To this day, anybody who's outside of, say, the continental sphere, and even within the continental sphere, there's plenty of people who do this. The analytics all do this. The subject-predicate structure is supreme. People take that to be just the obvious, necessary structure of anything that we talk about and how we talk about it, and how we're going to think about it and how it comes together, and how we will talk about how it comes together. And it's dogma. Quite literally, it's an unquestionable dogma. Like, when you tell them that that's not how things work, they cannot understand. Udi Kalasha, like, why are you here, man? You are, like, what, like 100 IQ and complaining about, like, the writing of a guy who, you should know who this guy is. I mean, you're muted for pretty much the end of this. Look, for in the future, for any of you, if you don't like Hegel, believe me, go ahead and to your heart's content in your own spaces and in the comments of my videos. That's perfectly fine. Talk about how much you hate Hegel. But don't do it in my live chats. Just kind of it muddles up the chat. I want to see actual stuff. Somebody says, please speak more about the subject-predicate structure. Is Hegel for or against it? Hegel is against the subject-predicate structure here. So let's go over it again. So since the concept is the object's own self, which presents itself as its becoming, it is not a static subject. Well, we already established that. So in this movement, the static subject itself perishes. It enters into difference content, blah, blah, blah. Differentiated content, we know that. The firm ground which ratiocination has in the static subject therefore shudders, and only this movement itself becomes the object. So for the rationalization, the subject is itself static outside of its objects and its own qualities, and qualities are appended to the subject as predicates. And you can take qualities away or predicates away and add them in, however you like subjectively. But they're not internal to each other. So some predicate does not necessitate some subject, and some subject does not necessitate some predicate. But Hegel's saying, like, the way that conceptual thinking works rather than ratiocinative thinking is that conceptual thinking doesn't do this whole subject-predicate divide thing. You can do it, you can describe it that way, but the way it's normally thought of, it doesn't work because they're not outside of each other. You don't just place them together willy-nilly. So he says the subject that fulfills its content ceases to go beyond it and cannot have any other predicates or accidents. So if you have a concept, you cannot say, well, what if I append, color to existence? Well, existence as a concept does not have color as a predicate. It's not the kind of thing you could do. It's not something that is an internal determination. Concepts deal with necessary predicates. So he says predicates or accidents. So they can be or not be, but they're not essential to the subject, because if they were essential to the subject, they would just be constituting of the subject itself. So conversely, the dispersion of the content is thereby bound together under the self. Another thing is, like a tomato, right? The qualities of a tomato, its predicates, are all bound up in the essence of the tomato, which is its concept. In the seed is the entire possibility. There's a better word. It's not possibility. The entire potential. In the seed is the entire potential, actual potential of the actual plant. So in the seed, you would say, are the predicates of the fruit, the predicates of the leaves, the predicates of the stems, and everything bound up in all that. The colors, the photosynthesis, all of that is all bound up within that seed. That seed is the whole thing. From it emerges the whole thing. So the seed is a universal. It is a unity. And this second portion is important. He says, conversely, the dispersion of the content is thereby bound together under the self. The content is not the universal, which, free of the subject, would fit several. So for a concept, predicates are not universals that can be shared. So if you treat red as a predicate, you can say, well, yeah, the tomato is red, the mango may be red, my shirt may be red, my blood is red. And so these all share the universal, red. That is what Hegel would call an abstract universal. And it's not even a proper universal at all. But the universal of the concept is a concrete unity. It is something that unifies, but it unifies what it generates as its own distinctions. So in the tomato as a full living process, the seed is unified with the stem, is unified with the leaves, is unified with the chlorophyll, is unified with the flowers, is unified with the fruit, is unified back with the seed. That is the universality of a concept. It's not the universality of an abstract predicate. So the universality of the subject in a concept is that unification of its own internal differences generated out of itself. The universality of a predicate is simply the fact that it externally can be qualified of many things, but this does not involve any process of how it is qualified, why it is qualified. So, yes, red can be qualified of, many things, but why is it there? Is red itself producing its being there? No. So red is not a concept in that way, in the same way that, the tomato seed is a proper concept. Does that clarify it? Anyways, we'll continue. We'll make it to the end of the section. So, it is a nature of representational thinking to follow the accidents or predicates and to go beyond them, and rightly so, since they are nothing more than predicates and accidents. But it is stopped in its tracks when what has the form of a predicate in a proposition is the substance itself. It suffers, as we might represent it, a counter-thrust. That is a very natural phrasing. I came up with something very similar myself. It starts from the subject as if this remained the underlying ground, but since the predicate is really the substance, it finds that the subject has passed over into the predicate and has thereby been upheaved. Look, I'm gonna glaze this right here, okay? So it starts from the subject as if this remained the underlying ground, but we find out. So this happens when we're dealing with propositions of this kind, like say the sun is a gaseous. It's a sphere of hot gaseous plasma. In that, the singular of the sun is really, so you might think, the sun is predicated with gaseous hot plasma. No. Here what you're actually saying is the gaseous hot plasma is the actual subject. The sun isn't really a thing. The sun is just an abstraction. The real thing is the gaseous hot plasma. And so the predicate becomes the substance or the subject of the sentence, the proposition. So the subject, the sun, has passed over into the predicate and has thereby been upheaved. So what seemed to be the underlying ground upon which things were predicated, the sun, has been upheaved to reveal that actually the predicates are the actual ground, the actual substance or subject. See what I mean? Upheaval works pretty damn well with the metaphors of ground. And also with the intellectual conception of ground. So, and since in this way what seems to be the predicate has become the whole and independent mass, and by the way, in case anybody forgets, upheaved, aufhebung. And since in this way what seems to be the predicate has become the whole independent mass, thinking cannot roam about freely, but is impeded by this weight. Usually the subject is first made the ground as the objective, fixed self. From there, the necessary movement proceeds to the multiplicity of determinations of predicates. So you have the sun is X, Y, and Z. Here, the knowing I itself comes in to take the place of this subject and serves as the nexus of the predicates and as the subject supporting them. This second subject means to have done with the first subject and to return into itself beyond it. But since the first subject enters into the determinations themselves and is their soul, the second subject, namely the knowing subject, still finds it there in the predicate. And instead of being able to be the driving force in the movement of the predicate, deciding by ratiocination whether this or that predicate is to be subscribed to the first object, it still has to deal with the self of the content, is supposed to cooperate with it instead of being for itself. Okay, that was weird. So going back over that, usually the subject is first made the ground as the objective fixed self. From there, the necessary movement proceeds to multiplicity determinations of predicates. Here, the knowing I itself comes in to take the place of this subject and serves as the nexus of the predicates and as the subject supporting them. Okay, so let's suppose that we're dealing with talking about a proposition about the I is, or the self is X, Y, and Z. Okay, this second subject means to have done with the first subject. Okay, I'm confused here as to where the reference is going. So the first half makes sense. This second half. So usually the subject is first made the ground as the objective fixed self. Let's see, take a detour. Antonio Limonetto asks, I'm still a bit stumped by the distinction between a predicate and a concrete universal. It sounds like Hegel is pointing towards essential determinations of a content. Am I wrong? You're not entirely wrong. So the thing with predicates and subjects is that the standard way that people deal with it is that predicates, you can call them properties, right? Maybe properties makes more sense, or qualities. That these are themselves just, they're universal in that they can be applied to many things. So you can apply to red to many things. But the predicates of a concept, or the qualities of a concept, properly speaking, are not that. They are not abstract universals that you can just slap on anything. The redness of a tomato, for example, is not an abstract universal redness that just happened to be slapped on the tomato. It is a necessary determination, a necessary quality for something that is happening in the tomato. I forget why it is that tomatoes are red, that there's some chemical thing about the maturation of the flesh that makes them red. It's not just like, well, they happen to be red and they can be just any other color. The very nutritional like structure of the fruit requires this color. So the color is not just some universal slapped on it externally. So it is the case that the predicates of a concept, if you're going to call them predicates at all, are not abstract universals that just can be compared to like that, something that appears the same in other things, because they're not there in the same way for the same reason. There is the universality of the concept rather than the universality of the abstract universal of the predicate is of a generative unity that is distinguishing itself into these so-called predicates. I don't know if that made it any more clear. Let me know if it makes it clear. All right. Going back to this second half of this paragraph. I'm still lost. Okay. So usually the subject is first made the ground as the objective fixed self. Okay. So here is the proposition about the self, the objective fixed self. From there, the necessary movement proceeds to the multiplicity of determinations of predicates. So the self is X, Y, Z. Here, the knowing I itself comes in to take the place of this subject and serves as the nexus of the predicates and as the subject supporting them. This second subject means to have done with the first subject and to return into itself beyond it. But since the first subject enters into the determinations themselves and is their soul, the second subject, namely the knowing subject, still finds it there in the predicate. And instead of being able to be the driving force of the movement of the predicate, deciding by ratiocination whether that predicate is to be ascribed to the first subject, it still has to deal with the self of the content. It's supposed to collaborate with it instead of being for itself. Okay, so this is just weird. It's not clear. There's something clear to me, but it's not entirely clear. So if we're dealing with a proposition about the objective fixed self, so the self is the object that we are dealing with. So self is X, Y, Z. And then we have the movement to the multiplicity of predicates. So then we have the knower of the proposition, or the knower of the object. The object is the self, but the knower is the knowing I. Comes in to take the place of the subject and serves as the nexus of the predicates and as the subject supporting them. So the way I'm interpreting this is, okay, we have the self is X, Y, and Z. Now, the self is the object in this proposition, but the self refers to me. Me, the one who's thinking the proposition. So in self, I also think me, the knowing self. So I shift from the self as the objective object to me, the self, as the subject. This second subject means to have done with the first subject and to return into itself beyond it. So now the proposition is about me. It's not about this objective other self. But since the first subject enters into the determinations themselves, so the X, Y, and Z, which are my X, Y, and Z, and is their soul, the second subject, namely the knowing subject, still finds it there in the predicate And instead of being able to be the driving force in the movement of the predicate, deciding by rationalization whether this or that predicate is to be ascribed to the first subject, it still has to deal with the self and the content. So we moved from the self is X, Y, and Z to self refers to me. And I am the subject, and I am the active power that decides what this or that is here. So I decide what my predicates are, and I decide what predicates adhere upon the self. But being that the predicates themselves are my predicates, and that I am X, Y, and Z, the X, Y, and Z forces me away from my subjective whim to be forced back into the objective contemplation of the self that is not my immediate self. So even when I think that I can move away into my own subjectivity to dictate what predicates go onto the self, being that the predicates are my predicates, the predicates themselves force me to deal with myself as the objective self, not as the self of my whim. Okay, I think that makes sense. That finally makes sense, unlike other things. All right. And that ends that whole thematic section. We went 16 minutes overboard, but, so be it. Any questions, comments at the end?
I have a question.
No, yeah.
Well, what do you think is the most important point to take out of the reading today?
I don't know, man. There's like three major points. There was a section just going on about external reflections in general. Probably the most fruitful was like the section 54 stuff, because that was like the most dense. That was, I would say that's actually the most important one out of all of these. The one that would be the most fruitful to focus on and to understand is section 54, which is amazingly a really dense, compact, yet lucid explanation of why being is thought. I had never actually seen him cover this explicitly. I did not know that he covered it explicitly. I just thought it was just kind of an offhand mention. I knew that he mentioned it here, but I didn't know that it was really like this well established. So yeah, section 54 I would say is the one that is probably the most important. All right, looking at the YouTube questions. Okay, somebody says, speculative scientist, I understand this passage, the last passage, section 60, about the first and second subject as the difference between the subject as the movement of truth making itself to the subject comprehending this movement for consciousness. Yeah, I think that's related. The people comment like the objective self is repelling to subjectively attached properties. All right, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, hey, Avalonia. I don't know if you came in late or not, but section 54, boy, that is something. You ought to check it out. Really, really deep section.
Section 54?
Yeah, 54. It's in the recording, so anyways. All right, well, for those of you tuned in, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this enlightening. I will... well, let me Let me post a Discord invite here. Because people don't know. Intro. Profile. Dang it, how do you do this? I don't invite people very much. Entertainment. Intro. Edit invite, no limit. Okay, there's my Discord server. You want to come and chat with me? I will be in the voice chat over there. So yeah, join, show up, talk, yap some stuff. Beyond that, that will be it for today. We're almost done, people. That's kind of crazy. I didn't think that we'd get this far. Didn't realize that about half of like the 50s would be just pretty basic stuff that didn't really need much commenting. If we keep going at this rate, next session might be the last. We might be done with the preface. That's kind of crazy. I think that this is the besides Greg Sadler's commentary on this, this will be the only full preface commentary. And obviously, in my own estimation, this is the best preface commentary for the Phenomenology Spirit. Like, nobody goes into the details that I do. Nobody shows you how to read this text.